Welcome to Chapter 3 of August House by John Hewitt. Tilly got up at 7:30 and took a quick shower, bracing herself for the long wait promised by the cable company. They'd given her a 4-hour window, from 8 to noon, and she was prepared for a morning of idling around the house accomplishing random chores. But at 8:15, a white van pulled up the driveway and stopped just behind her car. She went out to greet the technician, an older man with deep smile lines and a streak of grey in his short, tightly curled hair. He offered a firm handshake, introducing himself as Happy. "First, I'll need to take a look around," Happy said, glancing up at the tall facade. "Every old place has its quirks. Let's see what we're working with here." Tilly nodded, opening the door and stepping back to let him through. She watched as he moved from room to room, checking where the signal might struggle to reach through the thick walls, and noting the house's existing infrastructure. She waited in the kitchen, occasionally catching sight of him through doorways as he assessed the house. Happy eventually returned to the kitchen and gave a slight nod. "We're definitely going to need a mesh system," he said. "We'll start with a primary router here, then set up nodes in a few key rooms." Happy unpacked his tools and began the setup. The first router found a home on the kitchen counter, and then he moved through the house, pausing briefly in each room before setting the nodes in place. He explained how the system would eliminate dead zones, ensuring seamless coverage throughout the house. Tilly zoned out a little and told him, "Do what it takes." As he drilled into the wood panelling in a few spots and ran new wiring, the rhythmic buzz of his drill and the soft scrape of wires slipping through the panelling echoed through the quiet rooms. Tilly stayed in the kitchen most of the time, occasionally glancing up to see him, methodically positioning each device. By the time he was finished, more than 2 hours had passed, and Tilly could feel the new network's reach through her phone. Happy packed up his tools, glancing around the kitchen at the shelves of curios. His eye landed on a ceramic vase sitting on the counter. Its glossy glaze caught the light, and a delicate floral design wound gracefully around its base. He nodded toward it. "Nice place you've got here." "That vase, it's a beauty. Ever thought about selling pieces like this?" Tilly followed his gaze to the vase. "Selling? Not really. It's just been sitting there since I moved in." Happy walked over, hands on his hips as he examined it. "I do a bit of work on the side. Sell antiques and collectibles on eBay and Etsy. Pieces like this can fetch good money if they're in the right market. On eBay, stuff like this might move fast if it's rare or collectible, but Etsy is great for people looking for something vintage to fit a theme. Different platforms, different buyers." Tilly tilted her head. "So how do you figure out what goes where, and how long does it take?" He nodded at the vase. "This one. It's probably eBay material, more of a collector's item, but some things like vintage decor or handmade-looking pieces do way better on Etsy. As for timing, well," he gave a short laugh, "you need patience. Some things sell in a day, others take months. You never know who's looking, and that's part of the game." Tilly picked up the vase, holding it up to the light. It felt smooth and solid in her hands, its vibrant glaze unchipped. Turning it over, she spotted a clear, crisp stamp on the bottom. "There's a mark here. Does that make it special?" Happy leaned in, squinting slightly. He got his phone out and took a picture of it. "That's a good sign. It doesn't look mass-made. I think it's early 20th century, 1920s or so, and European. If they're well known, it could be a valuable piece. I'll look up the mark and figure out who the creator is." She put the vase back on the counter carefully. "I've got stuff like this all over the house. I wouldn't even know what to start with." Happy straightened, glancing around the room. "Here's what I'd suggest. Set aside a room where you can put anything you might want to sell. I'm sure you can spare a room in a big house like this. Take your time going through things. It's not a rush job. I mean, if you are in a hurry, you can always contact estate sale people." Tilly raised an eyebrow. "Estate sale?" "Yes, estate sale. Happy said, nodding. They stage events. Some are just like a fancy yard sale. For this, they might set up an auction. For your collection of fairy art, you should look for a buyer for the whole collection. It would sell more than the individual pieces. Probably. Estate people know all the local buyers. Santa Creda is filled with shops that sell this sort of thing. Estate sales are faster than what I can do, but everything's a trade-off. You'd to have people wandering through your house and garden assessing everything. I'm sure there's a ton of people who'd love to take a look inside this place. Tilly frowned slightly, picturing strangers picking through the house. I don't think I'm ready for strangers. Then take your time, Happy said, pulling a business card from his pocket and handing it to her. Make a list of what you're thinking about, and I can help sort it out. Some things are worth listing, others are just nice keepsakes. I'll let you know what's what. She accepted the card, reading it briefly before tucking it into her pocket. That sounds amazing. I'll definitely take you up on it. I need to clear some space, and I definitely need money. He gave a short laugh as he headed to the door, toolbox in hand. Just don't go selling something you'll regret later. Once it's gone, it's gone. She walked him to the door, nodding. Thanks, Happy. I'll call you once I've got a room ready. He tipped an imaginary hat as he stepped outside. Good luck with this place. You've got your work cut out for you, but there's a lot of heart in this house. Tilly set her phone on the counter and checked the time. 10:45. Her friends would arrive soon, and she wanted the house to look somewhat presentable. She brushed a strand of hair from her face and surveyed the kitchen. Bottles, a coffee grinder, and a pile of mismatched silverware cluttered the countertops, leaving her little space to work. She grabbed a rag and began wiping down the counters, pausing often to move items. She opened cabinets and drawers, shuffling things around to make room. The coffee grinder ended up on top of the fridge, and their silverware was relegated to a half-empty drawer. By the time she finished, their countertops were mostly clear, though the struggle to find homes through everything left her feeling more drained than accomplished. She sprayed the surfaces with apple-scented cleaner, scrubbing until the faint sweetness of apples filled the air. Stepping back, she nodded to herself. It was a start. Leaving the kitchen, she entered the living room, where the dust-draped furniture made the space feel forgotten. She tugged the sheets off one by one, shaking them out in the yard and hauling them to the laundry room. Beneath the coverings, the furniture appeared almost untouched, and the floral patterns on the couch were still vivid. She paused, brushing her hands on her shorts, and let her gaze linger. The chairs and tables seemed frozen in time, their surfaces smooth and unmarked. The house had seen so few inhabitants over the last 40 years, just Uncle Fred after her mother left at 18. It made her wonder if he'd ever used this room or if it had been waiting all this time. Tilly adjusted the arrangement of the furniture slightly, then cleared a stack of books from the coffee table and slid them onto a nearby shelf. Satisfied, she moved toward the drawing room, where sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting pale rectangles on the floor. She crouched by the far wall, where the wallpaper was peeling, and tugged at a loose corner. A strip came free, revealing dark wood panelling beneath. "No bad," she murmured, brushing the dust from her hands. The doorbell rang. Tilly wiped her hands on her shorts and walked to the door. When she opened it, Opal stood on the porch, wearing her usual overalls, with an old grey t-shirt underneath. Her hair was loosely tied back, and a canvas bag hung from her shoulder. She glanced past Tilly into the house, her expression lighting up. This place is even better than you described," Opal said, stepping inside. Her fingers brushed over the banister of the staircase as she walked, tracing the grooves worn smooth by years of use. "And yeah, it's got just the right amount of creepy. Love it." "Glad you think so," Tibby said. "Come on, I'll show you the drawing room." As they walked, Opal's gaze lingered on the details. The high ceilings, intricate mouldings, and the faded wallpaper. She paused at the staircase, looking up toward the landing. "If you ever get tired of all this space, let me know. It's wasted on just one person." He gave her a small laugh. "Noted." They reached the drawing room and Opal stopped in the doorway. She took in the expansive walls and tall windows, tilting her head slightly. "You know, this would be perfect for some murals. Something bold to wake it up." "You looking for a project?" Tilly asked. "Big spaces are hard to come by," Opal said, setting her bag on a chair. She pulled an iPad from the bag and held it up. "But first, Wi-Fi password? Dorm internet is the worst." Tilly grabbed a sticky note from the desk and handed it to her. "Here, I just set everything up with the tech this morning, mesh nodes and all." Opal paused, entering the password before looking up. "What's a mesh node?" "No clue," Tilly replied, folding her arms. "But it's a good thing, I think." Opal grinned as her iPad connected. "Good enough for me." She set it aside and picked up the spray bottle. "Wallpaper?" "Wallpaper," Tilly confirmed, nodding toward the wall. "Time to strip it back." Opal tested the nozzle on the spray bottle. "My mother always said I'd end up stripping." Tilly snorted and crouched to inspect a peeling edge. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway made her pause. She glanced toward the hall. "Sounds like Nick just got here." "Perfect. I love bossing Nick around." A knock echoed through the house, followed by Nick's familiar voice calling, "We're here." Opal gave Tilly a confused look. "We?" she whispered. Tilly shrugged. Nick appeared in the doorway a moment later, his tall frame filling the space as he looked around. Just behind him stood Aphid, a bright figure in the dusty house. Her blonde hair fell in loose waves, and she wore a fitted top in a blush colour paired with slim jeans and ankle boots. Her gaze moved over the room, lingering on the high ceiling and faded wallpaper. Tilly looked at her own now grimy shorts and t-shirt and sighed in her head. "Wow," Aphid said, her eyes moving slowly over the space. "This house has such a powerful aura. You can feel it, right?" She turned to Tilly and Opal, lifting her hand with open fingers. "It's like the house has layers, waiting to unfold." Tilly nodded, keeping her expression neutral, but her eyes flicked to Opal, who rolled her eyes a little. Nick set down the tool bag he'd brought and looked around with a slow nod. "This place is even bigger than I thought," he said, taking in the room. "A lot of work." "Oh, I think she's got a lot more than just work here," Aphid added, placing her fingertips lightly against the wall. "You can almost see the stories, each wall just waiting to be heard." Opal copied Aphid's gesture. "Tell me your dirty little secrets." Aphid glanced at Opal and smiled. Seeing this, it occurred to Tilly that Aphid might not be as oblivious as she appeared. Tilly tried to unclench the little ball of jealousy in her heart. It wasn't Aphid's fault Nick liked her, and apparently dating Nick had its challenges. Tilly gave her a nod. "That's great, Aphid. It's nice to have someone who can appreciate stories." Nick, now holding a utility knife, looked around the room. "So, are we all set to start peeling back the layers of this place?" Opal leaned casually against the wall, flashing Nick a confident smile. "For sure. This house is practically begging for a little attention." She cast a knowing look at Tilly, then gave the wall a playful pat. "You're such a flirt, August House." Aphie's eyes widened before a delighted smile spread across her face. "Exactly. It's like the house has been waiting for this moment," she said. Tilly cleared her throat, gesturing to the way of the weathered home, which rested on the side table. She picked it up, flipping through its warm pages to a passage she'd noticed earlier. "So, apparently, there's a ritual you're supposed to do before taking down wallpaper. Here it is." She ran her finger down the lines and then read aloud. Before removing anything, ask the house if it's ready to let go. Walls are more than paint and paper. They hold memories, like pressed flowers in a book. If you go in with a heavy hand, you might find resistance. But a gentle ask, that's the way to uncover a place's true self. She glanced up. Aphid, you seem in touch with the spirits. Would you like to do the honours? Aphid's eyes brightened and she stepped to the centre of the drawing room with a sweeping motion, placing one hand on the wall, her head tilted, her breathing slowing. The others watched as she pressed her palm flat, tracing slow circles over the wallpaper's textured pattern. August House, she said softly, her voice calm. Are you ready to reveal yourself? Aphid's hand glided down the wall. She paused, then opened her eyes and nodded. Yes, she declared. The house wants to be seen. Tilly nodded to Opal. All right then. Opal, you're up with the spray. Opal picked up the spray bottle, filled with the fabric softener solution she'd prepared. She gave a few test sprays on the wall, misting it until a scent of lavender filled the air, mingling with the musty odour of old paper. She adjusted the nozzle, then moved along the wall, covering the wallpaper with a thin, damp layer. Her strokes steady. Each spray landed with a soft hiss, droplets beading on the surface before darkening the faded pattern. Nick picked up a utility knife and started scoring the wallpaper. His first few attempts dug a bit too deep, leaving narrow cuts. Is it supposed to go all the way through? He asked, eyeing the slight grooves in the wall. Opal glanced over, adjusting her hold on the spray bottle. Not quite, just a light touch, she replied, demonstrating with a quick, gentle scrape along the wall. You're just helping it soak in a bit. Nick nodded and adjusted his pressure, finding a rhythm as he scored the paper in careful, deliberate strokes. Though he managed to keep most of his cuts in place, his blade occasionally veered off track, leaving a few jagged edges as he moved alongside Opal. Opal paused, giving him room, then wiped her damp fingers on her overalls, glancing at the book on the side table. Why don't you read us a bit of that guidebook, Aphid? Maybe we could use some wisdom while we peel back history. Aphid picked up The Way of the Weathered Home and turned to the bookmarked page, her fingers sliding across the faded paper as she skimmed. The spirit of a house lies in the patience of its walls, she read. Take care when peeling back the past. Each scratch, each line is a memory to be honoured. She looked up, resting her hand lightly on the wall again. Opal arched an eyebrow. We don't want to anger the wolves, not yet anyway. Nick gave a short huff of laughter, pressing a corner of the peeling wallpaper, which came off in uneven strips, the edges curling under his hands. I'll try, he muttered, eyes on the wall as he pried away another piece. It tore halfway, leaving an uneven patch. This stuff's really sticking in some spots. Maybe it doesn't want to change. Opal nudged him lightly with her elbow, reaching past to peel a stubborn edge. Nah, you're just helping it let go. Besides, I'd say it's due for a little shedding. She gave a quick spray from her bottle, waited a moment, then tugged the strip, which came off more smoothly for her. Aphid skimmed to another part of the book and read aloud. Remember, the walls are only as strong as the memories they hold. Use a gentle hand and a respectful touch. I'm pretty sure that means don't scrape too hard. Too much muscle might be a bad thing in this case. She looked at Nick and smiled. Nick returned a quick nod as he tackled another section with more care. He held the wallpaper gently, prying it loose in slow pulls, the strips coming off in different widths, some wider and some narrow. Meanwhile, Opal sprayed another section, watching the solution seep into the paper, darkening it. It looks like your respectful touch is working, she murmured to Tilly. Maybe the walls have decided we're trustworthy after all. Aphid glanced at the book, reading aloud with the same deliberate pace. If a wall resists, speak to it gently. Remind it of the beauty that lies beyond the layer it clings to. She placed her hand on the wall again, closing her eyes and murmuring, "You're beautiful as you are, but there's so much more to you." Opal gave her version with a glance to Aphid. "You're gonna love this, baby. We're gonna make you so sexy." Sexy. Sexy house. Nick gave a low chuckle, peeling away another strip and letting it drop to the growing pile on the floor. "Can't promise that, but I'll give it my best shot." They worked steadily, with Opal following up with the spray as Nick continued peeling and scoring. Aphid read aloud every so often, her voice softening the space as she dropped phrases into the quiet with an even, almost rhythmic tone. Tilly stepped back, watching them all, the ritual unfolding around her, the old walls of August House gradually revealing themselves in irregular patches beneath their hands. After a couple of hours, the last strip of wallpaper finally peeled away, fluttering to the floor in a crumpled heap. Tilly, Nick, Opal, and Aphid stepped back, each glancing over the now exposed wall with a mixture of surprise and satisfaction. Beneath the wallpaper, the walls were panelled in wood, its surface marked with years of darkened stain, the grain visible but dulled. The wood was weathered and worn in places, with faint lines and patches that hinted at its age, but it held a quiet dignity compared to the tired wallpaper that had covered it. Opal examined the panels. "Now this," she declared, "is a way better than that floral crap." Nick nodded, brushing a bit of lingering dust from the wood. "It's solid, too. Feels like the real deal," he said, giving it a light tap. The sound was steady and warm, a far cry from the hollow scrape of the wallpaper's peeling layers. Tilly tilted her head, studying the wall with fresh eyes. "It could use some polish and maybe a little stain touch-up, but it's a big improvement." Aphid stepped back, clasping her hands together. "That poor wall has been hidden under wallpaper for who knows how long, and now it's back to being itself." Opal nodded at Aphid. "Imagine not knowing this was under here." Tilly picked up a dust rag and started to wipe down the panels. In the afternoon, light slanting through the window, the panelling took on a soft glow, adding a warmth to the room that had been missing before. "I should give everyone a tour," Tilly said. She led the group from the drawing room, navigating a path through stacked furniture draped in dust sheets and crates piled high along the hallway walls. She pointed out the grand staircase, its banister ornately carved but scuffed from years of hands running over it, and gestured to the hallway lined with closed doors and framed portraits obscured by dust. As they entered the living room, a massive stone fireplace came into view, dominating one wall with rough, weathered stone stacked to the ceiling. Dust sheets hung loosely over the furniture, casting pale shapes in the afternoon light, filtering through bay windows. Ethan's eyes went wide as she looked around, taking in the room's size and the weight of the old stone hearth. "This is incredible," Aphid said, moving closer to the fireplace. "Can you imagine what it'd look like all polished up? It's practically its own monument." Nick lingered near the doorway, nodding as he took in the space. "Stone's solid. This place was built to last," he noted, tapping the hearthstone lightly. "A little cleaning and it'd be good to go." They continued to the dining room, where a long, stately table took up most of the room. Chairs with fading upholstery circled it, their high backs framed by the tarnished chandelier hanging above. Opal ran her hand along the back of one of the chairs, her gaze flicking to the windows, where light filtered through, softening the worn lines of the room. "It has atmosphere," she said simply, before glancing at Tilly, her fingers trailing off the chair and brushing lightly against Tilly's back as they moved on. Tilly paused for a moment. "Once we get past the dust, who knows?" They climbed the stairs to the second floor, where Tilly pointed out the largest bedroom. Sunlight filtered through tall windows overlooking the ocean, casting soft light on the four-poster bed draped in heavy, faded fabric. The glass doors led to a small balcony, its iron railings rusted but intact. Opal's gaze lingered on the balcony for a moment. "That view," she remarked quietly. Tilly acknowledged it with a slight nod, then led them to the bathroom. The door creaked open, revealing a clawfoot tub set by a window, its glass panes cloudy. Dual vanities stretched along one wall, their marble countertops still impressive, and the shower stall featured multiple nozzles, hinting at the room's former luxury. Aphid clapped her hands lightly, stepping into the bathroom and glancing around. "This could be an oasis. Just look at that tub." She brushed her fingers along its rim. "Imagine sinking into that." Opal glanced at the shower stall. "With all those nozzles, think of the things you could do in there," she remarked. Tilly raised an eyebrow and said, "Let's make sure it all works first, before moving them back into the hallway." They climbed the narrow stairs to the 3rd floor, reaching the quieter rooms at the top of the house. Tilly opened the door to a more regular-sized room with a narrow, wrought-iron bed frame and a small writing desk by the window. Opal stepped inside. "It's cozy," she remarked, leaning casually against the desk. "Perfect light for a studio." Tilly studied her for a moment. She nodded, started to say something but stopped. The tour descended to the basement. The stairs creaked underfoot as they led them into the dim, musty space. Boxes and trunks lined the walls, stacked to the ceiling in places, their surfaces covered in thick layers of dust. Tilly flipped a switch, and a series of lights flickered slowly on, illuminating faded tapestries, dusty crates of china, and stacks of antique furniture tucked into every corner. Nick picked up a delicate teacup, brushing off the dust. "These might be worth something," he observed, carefully setting it back into its box. Aphid looked around, her eyes wide as she took in the shelves and boxes. "It's like a whole world down here," she whispered, reaching out to touch a box with intricate carvings. "Who knows what's hiding in all this?" They looked around a bit, and Opal gasped appreciatively when they got to the wine cellar. "Holy crap, that's a lot of booze. You could open your own speakeasy. Crystal decanters, velvet-lined shelves, maybe a secret back room for VIPs. Her smile widened. "I'd be your first customer." Tilly brushed dust off a nearby bottle, her tone thoughtful. "If that's your style, you'd really appreciate the billiard room upstairs. Top-shelf liquors, cigars. But this probably goes back to my great-grandfather's time. He owned the house during Prohibition, and let's just say he had a creative approach to the law." Nick raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms. "Prohibition! Now we're talking, what kind of creative approach?" Tilly tilted her head, her fingers brushing the edge of the shelf. Import-export was his official business, but there were plenty of whispers about bootlegging and speakeasies. The billiard room has a setup that makes you wonder if those rumours were true. Aphid's lips curved slightly, her voice lowering. "It's like we're in a Somerset Maugham novel." Opal laughed, brushing her hand against her overalls. "If we find a hidden bar, I'm claiming it, and if there's a stash of cash, I'm upgrading my wardrobe." Tilly leaned back slightly, giving a faint smile. "It wouldn't surprise me if there's more to this house. I'm fairly certain there are at least 1 or 2 hidden rooms here. My great-grandfather wasn't exactly transparent about his dealings." Nick straightened, his grin widening. "Hidden rooms? That's it. Forget restoration. We're treasure hunters now." Opal gave Tilly a nudge as they moved toward the door. "All right, lead the way to the billiard room. Let's see what secrets your great-grandfather left behind." In the billiard room, Tilly lingered near the doorway, her hand brushing the edge of the pool table. The dark wood panelling and emerald green felt gave the room a hushed elegance. Glass-fronted cabinets displayed an assortment of decanters, their amber and clear contents catching the dim light. Beside them stood a humidor, its cedar interior faintly visible through the glass, though the cigars inside looked dry and unevenly stored. Behind her, the group spread out, taking in the space. Nick leaned against the far wall, his gaze sweeping over the bar cart and its neat array of crystal glasses. Opal perched on the arm of a leather chair, her heel tapping softly against its side. Aphid stood near one of the cabinets, her fingers tracing the glass as she studied the bottles inside. There was some perfunctory search for a hidden room, but there were no obvious secret doors. After a bit, the four of them just sat around. Opal poured herself a bit of bourbon, but, after a taste, left it untouched. She seemed more interested in holding the glass in her hand than in actually drinking it. She offered some to Tilly, who declined. Tilly was busy thinking. She had an inner argument with herself before putting out the offer. "There's a lot to it, there's a lot of space," she said, the words slower than she intended. "And a lot of work for one person." Nick turned, watching her now. Opal tilted her head, her usual grin softening as she caught the shift in Tilly's tone. "I've been thinking," Tilly continued, her voice steadier. "You've all been stuck in the dorms. Cramped rooms, loud neighbours, no privacy. I can't imagine what that's been like. This house, it's big enough for more than just me." Opal perked up, leaning forward. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Tilly hesitated. She felt the weight of the words she was about to say, the shift they could bring. "Opal," she started, her voice firmer now, "if you're serious about getting out of the dorms, and about helping with all the work this house needs, then yeah, I'm offering." Opal's grin widened. "Oh, I'm serious. You won't regret this. This place and we're going to be best friends." Tilly allowed herself a small smile, though the knot in her stomach hadn't fully unravelled. She turned to Nick next. "What about you? You've already brought tools. Are you in, or are you just here for the day?" Nick shrugged. "It would be nice to have roommates who fart less than Jason." "No promises," Opal said. Tilly's gaze landed on Aphid. Tilly felt the knot tighten again. "And you, Aphid?" Tilly asked, her voice quieter. "You've been a real help. If you want to stay, just say so." Aphid's face lit up. "Really? You'd let me stay here?" Tilly let out a slow breath, the knot easing slightly. "Okay," she said. "You're all in. On one condition. Everyone helps. No freeloaders." Tilly looked at the faces around her, people who would bring life to the quiet halls. Tilly had never felt quite ready for dorm life. This could be something like it, but on her terms. As they stood there, glancing around the hallway and at each other, there was a long, awkward pause before Opal said, "I gotta pee." This concludes Chapter 3 of August House by John Hewitt. Thank you for sticking through to the end. If you'd like to know when future chapters come up, please subscribe and click notifications. In the next chapter, we'll be exploring some new aspects of August House. Thank you for listening.